thus far I've put out 3 videos for the automatic to manual swap, and all 3 videos so far have been above 20 minutes, which is a lot higher than my normal recording and editing time. I usually try to keep them below 10 minutes. I want to be as detailed as possible so that if you want to attempt this swap, you will be able to do it and you can see every single thing that's involved, down to the last little bolt. That way there's, you know, a very good video guide for you to follow. One of the things that I didn't like going into this project was that there were only text tutorials on how to do this. And I'm not a text kind of guy, I'm a visual kind of guy, I'm a visual learner. A lot of you out there are visual learners, especially if you're going to get into this kind of project. You want to be able to see what's actually involved, maybe even before you start. That way you can decide if this is something that you want to do or if this is something that you want to pay someone to do, because it's pretty involved. So that's why the videos are so long, and I apologize in advance for it. They're like 30-minute videos per part. I want to make sure that I detail everything for you. If you're not going to be doing a swap, just skip the videos because they're really long and really boring. Unless you're interested in this kind of stuff, you know, if you have a Protege or a Probe or an MX6 or a Telstar or a 626, and this might be something that you want to consider in your future as an automatic owner, then please, I implore you, watch the entire ATX to MTX swap series so that you know what's involved. And I detail every single piece that you need prior to actually doing the swap, as long as you watch just about every single video that I had, including on my junkyard trips, because you're going to need the clutch lines as well, and the brackets, and you're going to have to rip the clutch pedal out, and a lot of different stuff is involved. I guess I should have actually started out with all the materials and all the lists, and that probably would have been good. Maybe I'll do that at the very end, I don't know. This is basically what you're left with after the transmission drops. Harness stays in place, and get your intake manifold out. The only thing supporting it right now is the jack and the passenger side engine mount, and that's enough to support it. I'm not worried about the engine. I'm going to inspect for damage here. Drive plate bolts look good. There's only one little scuff mark there. That looks to be the only kind of impact that was made. Now you can still put a breaker bar and turn this around if you want to check to see how true that is. Honestly, I think that drive plate is warped just a little bit. I think it's only off by 0.1 of a centimeter, 1/10 of a centimeter, but maybe that's enough to actually give it some wobble. So if my vibration is actually because of my crankshaft, that's something that I'm going to keep in mind. Now here you can see the 4 bolt holes that you have to remove through the starter cover. Then you have your 6 flex plate bolts, which is very similar to the flywheel. Those are going to be Loctited on there, and just from the color, I don't know if you can see the color there, it looks like it's probably going to be red Loctite. As you can see, the gasket is in still really good shape. I bet you I could reuse that gasket. I'm not going to get a good idea until I get that flex plate off if it's actually warped or not, or hopefully, hope to God it's not actually my crankshaft that's out of play. Could be something to do with thrust bearing clearances or main bearing clearances or something like that. Oh, that's a whole nother can of worms. The balance point for the engine would probably be right in the middle here. Maybe a little bit far forward on the valve cover, right up, let's just say dead center on the oil cap. That would be the balance point as far as shifting forward and backward on the engine. So when you get your crane hooked up, make sure that your crane is not positioned over here, which would be lifting up the back more than the front. You want to lift up the front a little bit more than the back as far as the valve cover. So, and that was actually one question that I had going into all this is, you know, where am I going to position the crane without a load leveler? Because if you go at it without a load leveler, you have to know where the load is going to be positioned or proportioned. And I found that out really quick, thankfully, because you have a jack as kind of a secondary backup. So You put all the weight on the crane, and when that starts tilting too far forward for your liking, you just kind of release the crane, put it back down on the weight back down on the jack, reposition your crane, and you can find your balance points real easy that way. And on the transmission, the side that's closest right here, I don't know what all is involved with that. I think that's where all your clutch packs and your gears are. So all of the weight seems to be centered in this area. Even though it fell forward, that was because I had the jack. The jack was actually slipping off of the end of the entire transmission coming this way. So of course the whole thing was going to fall forward no matter what. But if I put the jack directly in the middle, that whole entire transmission would have fallen backwards this way. So that's something to keep in mind. If I had to do this again, I would position the jack slightly off center, just barely. But because of the ridges, now there is a bottom ridge that goes along the transmission on the bottom, almost right down the middle. So you either have to decide, do I want to put my jack on this side or on this side? And I would recommend putting it on this side. I mean, you can just let it fall how it fell in the video. The most that I got the damage was that tiny little nick on the drive plate. I'm fine with that. Now we can get a much better look at the torque converter now that it's daytime, and the splines in here are loose, and I'm hoping that's what's contributing to my vibration. I don't know if you can see that, but that little ring down there is freely moving, and I don't know if it's supposed to be that way or not, but I know this entire thing is just chock full of transmission fluid, and that's why it's so heavy. So if you were to take this out, flip it over, this whole all the transmission fluid would probably drain out from here. Yeah. On the back, there's another one of those 4 quality renewal stickers. And you can see the 4 torque converter bolts. And that little, there's no spline on there. It's just a little mount nub. The front of the torque converter would then go onto this transmission side, and that little nub that you saw would be sticking out this way towards the engine. This bell housing is clean as a whistle. It's probably been about 15 years since this was serviced, since the quality renewal, whatever program that was associated with, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that was done before I even purchased the car, so that might have been like 1996 recall kind of thing. I'm not sure. I would like to get more information about that whole quality renewal program, because I know a lot of people don't have that sticker on the torque converter or on the transmission, and maybe that's part of the reason why they go out so easily, and maybe that's part of the reason why I've had mine for about 15 years. Maybe that quality renewal program does a lot of good. And this transmission probably splits into 3 or 4 different pieces. If I were to flip this over on the bottom, this whole section right here would come away, then this section would come away. It's cut into 3 sections on the bottom, but I really don't want to turn this thing over because I know it's probably still got some fluid in there in the axles. Another thing I was thinking about is this seal in here. I think the seal in here is still pretty good, so I'm hoping that I can get some type of seal puller, or I don't know, something that's got a little claw or hook on it, and pull this seal out and reuse that on my manual transmission. I'm pretty sure both of these seals are in good shape. I've never had a leak on my axle, so I'm hoping I can reuse those. That way, that's just one less thing for me to get. One thing I noticed about these seals is it looks like there's a mating surface here that goes around here. That's, my guess, is missing. And maybe not so much on that side, but definitely on that side. And my thought is it should look something like this, with this seal keeper, and I'm not sure how to get that out. I mean, I can probably end up ripping the seal out. I don't know, I might just be better off seeing if some of you guys have some pictures of what your transmission's axle parts look like. If they look like this with the automatic or without it on the manual. And that right there might be enough of why you need a slightly longer intermediate shaft. There is a difference in the front mounting bracket on the automatic versus the manual, because the manual has this cutout for the clutch line. The actual mount is the exact same, but the bracket's different. Here's the rear mount that I had so much trouble with on the automatic, and that location should be right here. But that's where the speed sensor goes, which means completely different rear mount. So if you're going to do an automatic to manual swap, you're going to need all three brackets. There are only three on the transmission side. That's the front mount, the transmission or driver side transmission mount, and the rear mount. You can reuse your front mount, but you will need a bracket. All three mounts. I read otherwise on another guide, which shitty guide. Definitely gonna have a junkyard trip in my future on Monday, because I need basically to pull an entire transmission again just to get those freaking brackets. I need that rear bracket and the rear mount. I mean, in the meantime, I could just bolt up the transmission on this mount and that mount, bolt it up around the side, and be perfectly good. You know, I can roll the car out of the driveway when it's like that. But you will want that rear mount bracket if you decide to drive the car. And besides, I need a starter. I need a manual starter anyway, so I'm gonna have to go to the junkyard, pull a rear mount and a starter, and yeah, it's gonna be a pain in the ass. That's where we're at. Now that I have a much better idea of what I'm looking at, this clutch kit from Saks comes with a new thrust bearing, a new pilot bearing, and I'm gonna guess this is some moly grease, molybdenum. It's just called moly for short, but it's molybdenum. And that's the whole kit. Should be good to go as far as that's concerned. Just take all this stuff and basically slap it right in there, bolt the transmission right back up. The 6 drive plate bolts are 19mm. When you get your breaker bar on here and you're going to try and get these off, remember that these are on there really well because they use Loctite on those. And when you try and spin this, or when you try and break those loose, your entire flex plate is going to spin as well. So you're going to need a second breaker bar with, I believe that's a 21mm socket on there for the drive, for the crankshaft pulley. And then I have this one, which is an extension, but pretty much any breaker bar that's, I don't know how long that is exactly, sorry. That way when it rotates, it's going to hit this lower control arm. I mean, this lower control arm will flex a little bit, but going laterally, it should provide enough leverage as you are turning this in a counterclockwise fashion. This side of the engine is only being supported by a jack, and it's actually about half off. There's not that much of that jack having purchased on that engine. So when I do this, I'm going to put my hand here to prevent the engine from rolling forward, and hopefully this works. There we go. Okay, after taking a look at the transmission and the torque converter, I believe what I saw when I looked up between those two rubber plugs, I'm not sure what to call them, they're just seal plugs, rubber seal plugs in the bottom of the transmission. When I looked up, I believe now what I saw was the actual bottom of the torque converter wheel. So there's nothing to be gained by taking those rubber boots out and looking up in there. You're not going to be able to see anything. Let's say that this main seal right here begins leaking, and this block right here is full of engine oil. That's where most of your engine oil is going to sit, is right in here. So if this seal starts leaking, one clue is that you're going to start getting leaks between this gasket, possibly, and from those square rubber boots at the bottom. There's 2 rubber boots, and if you see oil dripping down, it probably means that your main seal right there is blown, and that means taking everything apart. As you can see, it's not an easy procedure, so if you're going to pay a mechanic to do this, pay them what the job is worth. It's a tough job. Okay, now we are going to compare the automatic flex plate with the manual flywheel. Well, the main difference that jumps right out at me is this pin. This is going to have some kind of locking pin that's not there on the automatic. Actually, there's 3 pins. There's one here, one there, one there, as well as the bolts. There's a lot more bolt holes too, so that's going to be different, because these bolt holes are going to be for your clutch, and these pins, I imagine, are going to be for the other side, pressure plate or something like that. There are these small little divots here. I have no idea what those are about. And those are definitely not on the ATX flex plate. Yeah, that looks like a pretty good match there. Yeah. But the biggest difference is that this drive plate weighs like, I don't know, a couple of ounces. This thing is seriously lightweight. This thing, oh, this thing's probably about 20-25 pounds. You can see the flex plate is just about as wide as the teeth themselves. Maybe just a little bit bigger, but the manual is much thicker. Because of that, it's a solid chunk of aluminum, and it's really heavy. So that's some of the differences. Another difference that I should mention is on the ATX flex plate. This is put in here from the back side, and that kind of acts as your pilot bearing. And that's just enough to get that little nub on from the other side of the torque converter. Nub sits inside of that, and the torque converter gets bolted to that, and then these bolts get bolted to the engine. So the mystery is starting to slowly fade away, how all of this stuff is put together, and I'm pretty happy about that. I'm learning a lot. Learning the hard way, but I'm learning. Oh, and I also have a timing belt kit, new timing cover, and that's my slave cylinder in there. And I figure I'm probably going to end up doing all of that in a different video. I'll do, obviously, the slave cylinder in the swap video, but the cover and the timing belt, I think I'm going to wait until everything is back in the car and the car is running again, and then redo that. I know most people would pull the engine out completely with the trans and just do everything in one shot, but because I like to make videos, I'm just going to leave that for another time so that I can just do a video on changing the timing belt. Smart. Alright, I am storing the car tonight on just the 2 jack stands. Actually, it's just the 1 jack stand, which is supporting the edge of the engine. A couple things that you're going to want. Definitely, you're going to want a factory manual. You can find a PDF version of the factory manual, 94 anyway, online. A couple different places. You can check out Mazda626.net. Ask around for a link to get an electronic version. All of the manuals, except for the 5th gen. I don't think the 5th gen is currently available online yet, but the 4th gen is definitely available. 3rd gen is even available. So pick up a manual, because you're going to need some of these diagrams and torque specs and procedures and things. My flywheel bolts came in today. The flywheel bolts are different from the drive plate or flex plate bolts. They are a little bit longer. I haven't measured them yet, but definitely longer. They also come with red thread locker on them, so you don't have to put thread locker if you buy new bolts. If you reuse flywheel bolts from an existing flywheel, let's say you pull one out of a a manual donor car or whatever, and it comes with the flywheel bolts, you can reuse them. That is not a problem. That's perfectly fine. But you will have to put thread locker on the threads. These are brand new and they come with thread locker, so no problem there. Another thing that you might need are new axle seals. FW 5027-238 for that guy. This one is actually off of a 5th gen. The flywheel bolts are 5th gen, that's 5th gen. These are labeled for 2001 626. Same exact stuff, so I shouldn't have any problem finding this stuff. I've cleaned up my transmission a little bit more, looking a little bit nicer, and all of this rust is not from the aluminum. Aluminum does not rust. That's actually from the mount. When it was stored upside down, let's say flip this way, all the rust ran off onto it, so that's why all the rust is there. The flywheel bolts require sealant, thread locker on the bolts, and you tighten those down to 71 to 75 foot-pounds. So that's what we're gonna do. Oh my god, this thing is heavy. Heavy. Oh man. Oh, good lord. Oh, there's no easy way to do this. Just let that dangle there. Got that on, and I'm going to assume that's a 17. Oh, 19. That is tightened down to 72 foot-pounds. This is your pilot bearing, and as you can see, I've installed the flywheel without putting the pilot bearing in. This pilot bearing has to be pressed in, and it has to be flush. It has to be truly, squarely flush with the flywheel. I can try and take a mallet and bang it in there, but you're supposed to have a shop press that in. See, in this diagram it already shows the bearing is in there, and there's no mention anywhere in this entire factory manual of having to press that bearing in. I guess they just assume that the technician knows to do that. But for the DIYer, you or me that's doing it for the first time, learn the hard way. And learning the hard way is my specialty. Okay, we're back the next day. I got rained out last night. As soon as I got the torque bolts back on, it started raining, and I had to have a mad dash to put away the crane, and got the bearing pressed in, reinstalled the torque bolts, I went to 73 foot-pounds of torque this time, just because that seems to be the sweet spot between 71 and 75. Right? Good maths. I did not use any thread locker on it. I just reused the thread sealant that was already on there. It didn't strip it off or anything. It was pretty good. So my guess is the thread sealant waits until you use it for the first time, let the engine heat up, and that engine heat will then melt the thread locker into the threads, kind of thing, and that's when it sticks or whatever. But I did have the thread sealant or thread locker on hand, just in case I needed to use that. Made the determination that I did not reinstall